Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Is the End of Cookies Near? What is ITP 2.x and how should marketers and data professionals navigate? I'm Jake Spencer, a product marketing manager here at Telium, and I'm going to be your moderator today. Today's speaker is Ty Gavin, a well-rounded internet marketer and analytics consultant with a passion for problem solving, both installed and SaaS solutions for data modeling, web analytics, and conversion optimization. He has hands-on experience in every aspect of digital marketing, spanning previous careers as a webmaster, marketing manager, implementation engineer, technical consultant, and business analyst. Ty received his Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So, without further ado, we'll pass it off to Ty for the rest of today's webinar.
Hello, this is Ty. Thanks for joining. Today I'm excited to talk to you about ITP. Here's our agenda today. If you were at the Digital Velocity event in London last month, you have heard this already. This is basically the same talk I gave just a month ago. A lot of this stuff is changing very rapidly. So some of the stuff I talked about in June was stuff that just happened in May. Luckily, there's been a bit of a lull in the last 30 days, so this is pretty much the same talk from June. So we're going to talk about ITP 1 and 2, a quick summary of those, the current state of the cookie, first party and third party. We're going to cover not just Apple Safari, but also Google and Firefox as well, Google's Chrome. I have my perspective on the impact of ITP2, and then we'll talk about what's next, some practical steps you can take as a marketing or data professional. And then there's some additional resources we refer to at the end, some of my blogs. There's a handful of those you can look at on telium.com. Then we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So the end of cookies is near, or it's here, and you've heard this probably before. Maybe this sort of message doesn't shock you anymore. Maybe Apple's ITP finally woke you up to actually believe this statement. It seems like it's sort of woken up other browser vendors as well, so everybody's getting in on this. So this was a quote from a prediction in 2017 where someone did a survey, and this person reported, Emily Tan reports on the survey in February of 2017. She writes, over half of digital marketers believe cookie-based advertising will die out in the next 12 months as people-based marketing budgets grow, research has found. So about, in 2017, everyone sort of had this sense, or over half of digital marketers had this sense that cookies were kind of dying out. And they felt like it was going to happen in the next 12 months, sometime in 2018. And people had more money to spend on people-based marketing, so this is kind of a big deal. Another quote here from an article in the 22nd of May in 2019, just a few months ago, where Paul Cimino says, with Safari and Chrome collectively representing an estimated 77% of browsers, these moves will devastate third-party cookie makers, creating a crisis for ad tech businesses dependent on that data. So Paul had actually written an article in 2013 predicting the end of cookies in 2018. So he said in 2013, cookies have about 5 years left. So this is Paul writing an article in 2019, pretty much saying he was right back in 2013. And as he says here, this is a big deal for those who make their money on third-party cookies. It's a crisis for ad tech businesses. So here's time for a quick poll on how you rate yourself on your current ITP knowledge. So on the left there, someone who doesn't know much, maybe they think mostly about the edible version of cookies. I put myself. On the right is someone who's more advanced, someone who, this is Simo Hava here, he's out of Finland. He blogs on ITP and has some creative workarounds. So we'll give you a chance to take this poll and rate yourself where you see yourself fit. All right, thanks for getting kind of an even spread here. No one's considering, there's a few considering themselves advanced now. So maybe you've already written some code and you have a workaround on your site in JavaScript. Great, thanks for taking that poll. So here's a quick summary. There's a lot of blogs on this topic, and I'm going to summarize ITP1, ITP2 very quickly for you. So in ITP1, Apple introduces this concept of machine learning. So they put the I in ITP with intelligent tracking prevention. So trackers out there. Block anyone they classify as a tracker and block their third-party cookie thread in the third-party context. They also block other identification methods such as fingerprinting. So fingerprinting has been the classic workaround when someone blocks a third-party cookie. The server will collect the incoming HTTP request from this tracking beacon, and they'll look at the user agent string, they'll look at the IP address, maybe other settings in there, like did you set do not track, yes or no, and they can use that to uniquely identify you, maybe in your office, where you share the same IP address as a bunch of others in your office. And they can actually use that to give you an identification. And so what Safari has done is it made it look to the data collection server as if everybody has the same user agent string, so they all look the same. And then you'll find that Chrome and Firefox are also doing that as well. They also did something where they would try to detect when you clicked on an ad. Sometimes the ad would go to one destination and then redirect you to another destination, redirect you to another destination, and finally to your landing page. And they're watching those people set cookies, and they're classifying them as trackers as well. So this machine learning is classifying endpoints out there as tracking endpoints. And that technique has been around for many, many years. I remember when I was a marketing manager back in 2003, I was outsourcing pay-per-click management, and that was their technique. Clicked on the ad, it redirected to their server, then sent you to your final destination. So that was 2017, 2018. Then ITP 2 comes out very, very recently. Some of it was in 2018, where they start making some radical changes, where they limit the client-side first-party cookies to just 7 days. So if you're a JavaScript developer or you're working for one of the tracking companies and you need to set a client-side identifier and you use JavaScript to do that, they're going to limit that cookie to 7 days. They also introduce truncating referring URLs and tracking pixels. So the referring URL for a beacon is the page that you're browsing. So the web server sees what page you're on, and they see the full URL. So Apple's kind of going after someone like a Facebook, where they can have their tracking beacon on every page, and they know not just what you did on Facebook, but what you do on other websites out there. And so they can use that referring URL to see the path. So before you'd be on example.com/shoes, and then you move to example.com/books, and they would see books, and they would see shoes, and then as you drill down to different categories of books, they'd find out, as URL changes, they'd find out the path changes as well. What Apple is doing is blocking the /shoes and the /books, and you just get the domain. You just get the example.com that's available server-side. So a lot of these ad networks using just very simple pixels, and they're just doing that image request, and that's a very easy way for them to get more information about where you are on another website. Apple's truncating that. And then Apple in ITP 2 limits client-side cookies even more. So their final iteration of ITP 2, I think it's 2.2, is to limit cookies client-side to just 1 day. So under certain conditions, your 7-day cookie that you set via JavaScript is now only available for 1 day. So here's my one-sentence summary on ITP. So it's the term Apple uses to describe their Safari browser limitations imposed on cookies created via JavaScript or server-side in third-party domains. And of course, all this buzz that Apple's getting out there, Google has to chime in. So Google does on May 7th. This gentleman, Ben, Director of Chrome Product Management, has this quote in one of their blogs on Chromium. Because of this, blunt solutions that block all cookies can significantly degrade the simple web experience that you know today, while heuristic-based approaches, where the browser guesses at a cookie's purpose, make the web unpredictable for developers. So what Apple is saying here is, bluntly blocking all cookies is going to have a negative impact on the end user. So if you're going to a website and you enter in, maybe it's a weather website, and you enter in your zip code, your postal code, and maybe you have 3 different destinations that you put in, and you want to save those. Those are your 3 areas that you check frequently. Normally, a website would just put those in a cookie, and so the next time you came back, it would remember your postcodes, and you wouldn't have to type them all in again. So by having that cookie only last 7 days or 1 day, and you return, you have to re-enter your postcodes again, and that's not just postal codes. That could be your volume preferences or any other kind of settings that you might want to do to make that web a better experience just for you. Cookies were a good place to put that information. And they also make a note at the end. So Google's maybe being a more developer focused here when they say it makes the web unpredictable for developers. So if I'm writing JavaScript code, I don't know how long my cookie's going to last. It changes what I have to do. I may have to write special code just for Safari, or I may have to write extra workaround code that may not work the next day. And you can see Apple's coming out with frequent changes, so I don't know if I'm writing code that's going to work tomorrow. So here's 4 bullet points that Apple put on their ITP 2.1 blog around cookies. And these bullets are exactly what they posted on their blog. So the first bullet is only cookies created through document cookie are affected by this change. So in ITP 2.1, document.cookie is the JavaScript way of setting a cookie. So they're going after client-side set cookies now in 2.1. In ITP 1, they got rid of server-side third-party cookies effectively. And this change that they're referring to is a 7-day cap of first-party cookies. The change covers cookies created in first-party context as well as third-party iframes. So an iframe is just a way of pretending to be first-party, so it's effectively saying the same thing. Session cookies are not affected. They remain session cookies, which basically means if you set no expiration date in your JavaScript cookie, it's going to expire when you close your browser. So that's a session cookie doesn't change. And their last bullet here, persistent cookies that have an expiry shorter than 7 days keep their shorter expiry. So if you set a 2-day cookie, they're not going to expand it to 7 days for you. And ITP 2.2 adds a further limitation. So ITP 1, you've had this limitation on third-party cookies, and then the next iteration of ITP 1, they limit third-party cookies even more, or ITP 2 starts limiting third-party cookies even more. And then now into ITP 2.1 and 2.2, they limit first-party cookies to 7 days, and then there's a special case where in ITP 2.2, your first-party cookie is now only 1 day. So they have different iterations, and with each iteration, it becomes more restricted. So these 2 conditions have to be met. A domain classified with cross-site tracking capabilities was responsible for navigating the user to the current web page. So they used their machine learning and they categorized this as a tracking site. And you were on that tracking site, clicked on a link, and that brought you to a different website. So that destination website now is going to limit all client-side cookies to just 1 day duration. If that condition and the second one is met, the final URL of the navigation mentioned above has a query string and or fragment identifier. So that means when you clicked on that link, there was something in the query string. Typically that thing in the query string is an identifier, the click ID or user ID or ad ID, something that gives you information about what they clicked on and carries it through to the destination page. So if both those conditions are there, they're going to limit that client-side cookie to just 1 day. And that's not just ad vendors' client-side cookies. That's any cookie your web developer might be setting, such as postal codes. They're going to limit it to 1 day when these conditions are met. So the second bullet point there talks about the fragment identifier. That was a common workaround that I think Apple even recommended for ITP 1 that people had put in place. And now they're saying when you use that workaround, they're going to restrict you even more. So getting into some of the interesting discussion or characters involved with ITP, here's John Weilander. He's the main developer at Apple making these changes in Safari browser. You can see he's a hacker fiction novel writer. He's also a singer-songwriter, and you can see him pictured next to his microphone here. So he's a bit of a rock star, and I think the ITP stuff only makes people want to buy more of his albums. And you'll see Simo Ahava here that I mentioned as the advanced kind of blogger on the topic. He's talking to John on Twitter, and he's asking a question about ITP 2.1 here, and here's John's answer. Only document cookies are affected by the 7-day cap in ITP 2.1. Cross-site tracking is bad for people and for the web. Therefore, ITP will evolve to protect users from being tracked. They're making like a value, a moral judgment here when they say it's bad for people. It's kind of like a Google historic, don't be evil. Apple's taking that moral stance. And when I read that final sentence, the first thing I think, and this is related to ITP 2.1 in February, the first thing I think is what next? If they say ITP will evolve to protect users from being tracked, what next? ITP 2.2 reduced the length of cookies even further. So Apple's trying to be maybe unpredictable on purpose. You don't know what's next, but be ready for it. So don't even try to create workarounds. Now, why does Simo care so much? Why is he engaging John here? Well, he works primarily around Google Analytics. So His client base, or those who read his blog, are typically Google Analytics users, and they care a lot about the first-party cookie because that's how Google Analytics creates an identifier. Some other enterprise vendors will use a server-side generated cookie, which is an easier workaround, but this 7-day cap directly impacts, and the 1-day cap that follows directly impacts Google Analytics ID. So here's a story about a junior webmaster back in 2003 who decided to cookie every single field in a form. Back then we had these long forms, and so if you wanted to download free trial software, you had to fill in your name, email, address, job title, phone number, and after you scroll down and fill out this large form, you click submit and you get to download your free trial software. And there was multiple free trial softwares on this website, so you could go to 3 different forms, and you have to fill all 3 out to get a free trial for 3 different pieces of software. So this webmaster, I was this junior webmaster, decided to cookie all this information. So I'd make it easier for the second form and the third form for the person to get to download the software. And actually back then, Firefox had a cookie limit of about 20, maybe 25 cookies. And so what happened is my long form started deleting other cookies, other first-party cookies on the site because I tried to create more than 20. And then I basically broke the site. So lesson learned. Back then we weren't talking about PII so much, so I should have known to not cookie email address and those sort of things. But I didn't, and I learned the hard way to figure out Firefox's limitations on the number of cookies you could set at the time. So what is the reason for general distaste in cookie? I know my personal example, I'll get into a little more why that was part of the problem, what I was doing back then. The first reason is difficult to explain cookies to our relatives. You can't talk about them with your family. You can't tell your grandma, let's talk about cookies in the browser while you're eating the cookies that she just pulled out of the oven. She's not interested. I mentioned to my brother I'm going to give me a talk on cookies, and he sent me a link to a animated GIF of Cookie Monster saying yum yum cookies. He's a millennial. So you aren't going to go far when you start talking about cookies to people. Second, there's a general distaste of cookies, are the misuse by JavaScript developers. I mentioned myself as possibly cooking PII information. A JavaScript developer hopefully is not cooking a credit card number. With the general awareness of GDPR and other initiatives like that, I think we're smarter now. I think webmasters are coming in smarter. But there's always going to be that one that didn't read the latest privacy rules. And so what Safari is doing is effectively, helping to protect us from ourselves. So that's a general misuse by JavaScript developers. The other problem with cookies is they're shared by all scripts you run on your site. So I may cookie someone's email address when they fill out a form, and some other vendor may come along and say, hey, look at all this great stuff. I'm going to pick that up and collect that data too. And that's a big problem, so it's that data leakage problem. So anybody's running JavaScript can read your first-party cookies. It's also the first step to a JavaScript injection attack. So if someone can compromise a cookie, a lot of times that's the first step to being able to run some other JavaScript loaded from another CDN or another location that you didn't want to load from, a malicious script. So if they can hack your cookie, then they can actually make some bad things happen on your website. And the main problem with cookies, third-party cookies in general, is they have historically been used to show highly targeted ads. So that whole creep factor, as you browse the internet, you have these red shoes that are following you around. So I think that last bullet is really the main thing that made consumers aware of what's going on here. How does this browser know? It doesn't make sense. I don't understand what's going on here, but they could definitely see that they're being followed. So Apple takes advantage of this kind of consumer awareness, and they're capitalizing right now. This is a screenshot of a TV commercial that was actually on TV. I don't watch a lot of TV. I happened to be watching The Simpsons one night, and this came on. And so I'm like, wow, Apple is really putting a lot of money behind this privacy stuff. So in this specific screenshot, this gentleman walks to use the toilet next to someone else, and he actually realizes how close he is, and he starts to walk the other direction. There's other examples. When a waiter comes to a table, the two engage in conversation, all of a sudden become very quiet. And so there's these real-world, they're kind of connecting the dots between the real-world privacy needs and the browsing privacy needs. And they have a video. They spend a lot of money on this video. So it's part of this big brand initiative. And these Apple ITP 2 announcements also gain traction. So they're trying to win the hearts of the consumer. So let's talk a little about Google, and then we'll talk about Firefox. So what does Google think about all this? This is Google's general privacy page. They say Google's play an important role. Without them, using the web would be a much more frustrating experience. I think we would all generally agree. But at the same time, there's another request for comments. This is a GitHub link here from someone called Mike West at Google, who does a lot of the Chrome development. And he's proposing a whole new standard out there. And he's saying cookies have some issues. They're hard to use securely, and they add substantial weight to the user's outgoing requests. And they enable tracking users' activity across the web in potentially surprising ways. So he's covering a couple things here. The substantial weight means you could set 4 kilobytes of cookies, and every request to a web server in that matching domain will also send that 4 kilobytes. So this is slowing down the web. It's creating more network slowness out there. Especially if you have a phone with limited network, that's going to be a problem. So this increased weight of cookie abuse is a problem, and they're hard to use securely. So he's proposing something called HTTP state tokens in this request for comments proposal. And what that'll do is give a browser an identifier that the browser sets and can delete or recreate on its own timing. And that will be used to identify an individual browser client outside of a cookie. So no cookies needed. The browser generates this and shows you what IDs it's using for what websites, and you can clear it or not. And so this is a new proposal to basically allow you to stay logged in without cookies. Google's also talking a lot about what's called a SameSite attribute in HTTP headers. So here's another developer advocate from Google, and there's a website link there. And I actually have a blog where I list all these links, so you can get access to these links in one single blog on tealium.com. Here's a quote from someone named Rohan. Introducing the SameSite attribute on a cookie provides 3 different ways to control this behavior. You can choose to not specify the attribute, or you can use strict or lax to limit the cookie to SameSite request. If you set SameSite equals strict, this means your cookie will only be sent in a first-party context. So what Google's approach is, they're allowing developers to say how they want their cookie to be used. If you want your cookie to be used across domains, then you would set SameSite equals none. And by communicating that, the server, the web server the developer wrote, the logic is saying, I'm creating a cookie now on this website, but I want it to be read in other websites. So they're saying this is going to be a third-party cookie for the purpose of tracking. And so maybe the browser then has filters to say, block these types of cookies, or maybe you have a control in your browser. You can see which web servers are setting these types of cookies. So I could see features coming up in Chrome to kind of give you visibility to these sort of things. But this is basically saying, let the developer say how the cookie is being used, and maybe the client can determine if that's important to them. What's happening in Chrome 76, and we're on Chrome 75 right now. Next couple months, I'm assuming Chrome 76 will come out, is you'll have the ability to test this out. So they have a flag you can set where they will default SameSite equals to lax if the web server doesn't set it at all. So that's effectively, with that flag enabled in your browser, effectively blocking third-party cookies from being read. And this is going to come out. I found another developer conversation where they hint that this is coming out in Chrome 80, which is Chrome version 80, which is going to be February. They're planning for February of 2020. So right now with the flag, you can set it. That flag might become the default as soon as February 2020, which is effectively, in my mind, Google saying no more third-party cookies being read across domains. Now, if a developer is setting it SameSite equals none, and they aren't using Google's default, then it would be able to be read in third-party domains. So I expect all these ad vendors to be doing that sort of thing, and then we'll see what Chrome provides in terms of controls when you can enable or disable these certain things. So Firefox, not to be forgotten. Firefox, starting with version 67, says you can block harmful scripts, including crypto miners and fingerprinters. These privacy protections are mostly invisible, but you'll know they're working when you see the shield icon. So, if you have Firefox and you see that shield icon, you can be very proud of yourself that you have a good browser protecting you from some of these things. This was written in the 21st of May, and it's on their kind of support website. And I upgraded to Firefox 67 at the end of May. You'll see the screenshot I saw when I did that upgrade in the next slide, but I want to talk about crypto miners. No one else is talking about crypto miners, Safari and Google or Chrome are not. But in the off chance you visit a obscure website and they start running JavaScript in the background and you don't even know what's running, but they're mining Bitcoin or something like that, it's going to suck your CPU, it's going to drain your battery while they're leveraging your CPU to do their work. So that's what they're looking at for those. So this is a screen that showed up for me when I upgraded at the end of May. And you can see they're also branding themselves as a privacy browser. You can see at the end it says, plus Firefox has upped your protection against ad trackers. Not sure exactly what that means there. I'm guessing it's the fingerprint stuff that they're referring to. But you can see they have their branding as well on the privacy side. Telium has some experience working directly with Firefox. Firefox leverages a third-party service called disconnect.me. And if you move your Firefox setting to strict in the privacy settings, it will start looking at this list of servers and blocking requests to those servers. So that's kind of Firefox's partner to block sites that they consider trackers. So they were actually blocking Telium's UTag for a brief period. Telium had a relationship with them, and they didn't let us know, but they started blocking it. So we reached out to them again and said, why are you doing this? That's our tag management software. They said the reason was we didn't have it updated on our privacy documentation available online, that we were not collecting IP addresses on our CDN logs. So all we had to do, we haven't been collecting IP addresses on our CDN logs, so all we had to do is communicate that on a couple web pages. Once we did that, they pulled us off their list, and our UTag.js will run in Firefox when people get to that strict security setting. I think it was the EU in 2016 that declared internet IP addresses as PII, so CDNs should no longer be recording that information. Now, side note, basically after Telium was allowed to run our tag management, there's some Google fans on there saying, why not Google Tag Manager as well? And Disconnect's response is, and this is all on GitHub, they say, well, if Google updates their privacy policy to say, we're not collecting IP addresses, then they would pull them out as well. But I'm not sure if that has happened since I read that discussion. So what is the actual impact? We covered kind of what Google and Apple and Safari, Firefox are all doing here. What is the actual impact to you? So, this data is from StatCounter. It's actually Europe's data. So I gave this talk in London. So all across Europe, Safari was 17%. Unless you live in Sweden, where it was 33%. It's generally not the most popular browser there. Chrome is still the winner, and if you add Chrome and Firefox, you're looking at at least 50% across the world, probably 55 to 60% for these two browsers together. So you still have the majority of your data there. And since I mentioned this is really going after those Google Analytics vendors that set the client-side cookie first-party restriction is really only in Safari. So if you have a different analytics provider, which we'll talk about as well, and most people do. Most people have Google Analytics plus something else. You may not be impacted at all in your second analytics provider. And then if you do have Google Analytics and you're aware of this, you can filter your reports so you can only show data from Chrome and Firefox and get more accurate metrics. We'll talk about that a little more. So in summary, my conclusion is you're not an advertisement which has all this information about you. So the biggest impact is not going to be your analytics data. It's really going to be people are going to see less relevant ads or less off-topic ads. So the ads you're going to see on a web page are going to be about what you're reading right now, not necessarily what you did a week ago or a month ago. So less off-topic ads is going to be the significant impact on the web. So I mentioned enterprise analytics like Adobe. Here's WebTrek's response when ITP 2.1 came out. So WebTrek will have to update its tracking servers and load balancers to set new cookie flags, secure and HTTP only. This is the only exception where Apple allows a cookie to be stored longer than 7 days. If because these kinds of cookies are usually used to prevent re-login every time a person returns to a website. So server-side cookies, if you follow Apple's restrictions and say this is a secure cookie and it's an HTTP-only cookie, those are going to persist longer than 7 days. And so here's WebTrek saying we're going to update our data collection service to do that. So they're not going to be limited with their visitor ID to only 7 days. Someone like Adobe has, their data collection endpoint. I'm not sure if they added secure and HTTP-only flags yet for Adobe. I was going to check this morning, but I did not check. But if you go to apple.com, they actually use Adobe, and you should see if they're setting the secure and HTTP-only flags. If you want to check them out. TLM can do this too. So once you CNAME, it becomes a first-party cookie, and we can use the secure and HTTP-only settings. So, like I mentioned, this is the same slide I showed earlier. It's really more about third-party cookie makers and ad tech businesses that are going to be the most significantly impacted. So here's some kind of practical steps for different groups at your company. If you're in data and analytics, your visitor return rate reports are going to be a little off, especially in Google Analytics. So you can either filter your reports and look at just the Chrome filter of these reports, and you could see your general visitor return rate, and then kind of apply that across your total traffic to get an idea of your total returning visitors. You can still measure conversion rates using other browsers, so you can also filter your reports and look at the non-Safari audiences to understand conversion rates on these browsers. So, Safari, client-side cookies might last 1 or 7 days. If they convert the same day, great, but if they don't, then your reports are going to be off. But the visits and page views metrics should be fine. You only really need a one-day cookie to capture these metrics. But your unique monthly visitors will not be accurate. And again, it depends on which tools and how things are set up. So compare your reports between Google and Adobe. Understand, yes, they're different, not because of any bad implementation, other than people are coming from different browsers with different restrictions. And you can extrapolate. Maybe if you generate a monthly report, put an asterisk there that you've calculated your total monthly return visitors using Chrome data and extrapolated that. And just an asterisk in your report might be all you need. So for the IT and implementation teams, what can you do to help? I'm recommending in the second bullet there to leverage local storage as a temporary workaround in the browser. But in order to use local storage, you have to have all your domains matched. So if you have a checkout process where you change domains, or you go from www to checkout something, that's going to be an issue with local storage. Local storage will not carry across those websites. So local storage is a great workaround. I don't know if it's going to be blocked eventually. Apple's constantly changing, but at least for now, maybe for 6 months, for 12 months, it's going to be a great workaround. Very easy to implement in the browser using JavaScript. But your IT team needs to pull out that checkout workflow flow in your website and change it back to www. Some work on their side. Persist your visitor ID and opt-out preferences in local storage, and then bring it back into the cookie. I don't have code examples here. You can go in the question or look for. Work with TLM or your analytics vendor to create a CNAME entry for your data collection endpoint. So TLM uses collect.tlmiq.com, and you can alias that to match your website root domain. So collect.example.co.uk is your website. And that basically, any data sent to your collect.example will just be DNS routed to collect.tlmiq, and in the browser it looks like a first-party cookie. For customer experience and marketing teams, think more about what you can do to customize the experience around what you know right now, and not necessarily what you knew a week ago or previous visit data. Try to use the current visit data, the current browser type, any information you have to target your visitor. So you do get a lot of information. When someone lands on your site, you know the referring URL that brought them to your site. You know maybe what keywords they're searching and arriving from. You know the landing page. So you have a lot of information in a few page views, and try targeting your visitors primarily on that for a customized experience. A second recommendation is make authentication extremely easy. if you have authentication, then you have a consistent identifier, and it doesn't matter if the cookie disappeared. Your anonymous visitor identifier. You can create an anonymous identifier generated from the user ID. And then you have reasons to authenticate. So a feature like save your postal codes or your zip codes for the next time only if authenticate. So that every time they come back, they're authenticated. They have all their settings ready to go. So add value by requesting authentication. My last bullet there, this is a fun technology that's a category of single-page apps that's called progressive web apps. It basically makes your website faster, makes it look more like an app. And so if someone's browsing the web, they get to your website, it almost appears as if they installed an app. They didn't have to go through the App Store. And then when you have that experience, it looks like an app, people are going to be more likely to log in. It's more normal to log in to an app than maybe a website. So here's some settings, some things you can do to get people to authenticate and get a more consistent visitor ID. So here's a summary and conclusion. Who are the winners and who comes in second place? Web users who want more privacy and ads that are less specific might win here. Google and Apple might win if they gain browser share as a result of their branding and people's perception of how they protect their privacy. Anybody who uses first-party cookies or server-side cookies is going to win. Anyone who relied on third-party cookies is going to be coming in second place. Web developers, I think, come in second place because we really wish we had to code for just one browser. We're kind of glad Internet Explorer is kind of on its way out, and we don't have to write custom code for that browser, but now it appears like we have to write custom code for certain browsers if they start deviating. And anybody who needs 100% accurate in your web analytics is probably going to be bummed. Wait, you thought I was done, but just when we thought we were done, Apple does one more update. So this is a May 22nd post by John Weilander here. And this is not an update to Safari specifically at this point. They're proposing some new standard. They're calling it privacy preserving ad click attribution. And if you Google privacy preserving, it's kind of a fancy academic term that people use to make data look more random so you can't identify individuals. And what that is going to do is say Apple's going to take on into their browser a way for them to track clicks from ads and a way for them to track conversions of these ads and then send that data back to the ad vendor in their own time. So the code for an ad vendor is going to look something like this. So this is the HTML for an ad that you're going to click on. They're going to have to put a destination in there, and they're going to have to put a campaign ID in there, and they get 64 campaign IDs. And so when Apple Safari sees this, they will store it in the browser themselves and hold on to it, not on the cookie, just in the browser, what the campaign ID was, where they came from. And then when they do make a purchase, they will send that information to the ad vendor. But they aren't going to do it in real time. They're going to hold on to it for 24 to 48 hours. And then send that information, that conversion event, back to the ad vendor. One of the things they do here too is they give you an identifier that is less unique, so there could be an increased chance of you actually looking like someone else, your ID being the same as another person. But they feel like they're going to give the conversion metrics and back to the ad vendors because maybe the frustration from the ad vendors, like, why are you removing our first-party cookies? Why are you blocking these? We can't optimize ads anymore. So this is Apple coming back in and saying, well, we're going to do it this way. And who knows if the ad vendors are going to adopt this or if this is going to be a standard, but this is the latest. At the end of May, Apple just proposed this. So my actual conclusion here. Focus on the quick wins. What's simple and what works right now. Since things are constantly changing, you don't know what won't work or will work in the next 30 days. And Apple, that's what Apple wants. They don't want you to know what's going to work or not. But there's some things that work right now. Local storage is one. It's a quick and easy thing to do in JavaScript. Ask yourself, how will this update impact my data? So with every kind of press release, kind of think about it from what's it going to do to my reports, which reports are going to be affected, so that you can set expectation when you build these reports. And you've probably heard this before, but this is what everyone is saying right now. Provide the best experience on your website. make sure your clients have an understanding of their privacy and that you give them their privacy. And focusing on that is the ultimate, can help your brand and can help your company do well. Like I mentioned, Apple sits on your conversion event for 24 to 48 hours. You can use TLEAM to send that data real side. So if you send it to TLEAM's collect endpoint using our event data framework, we can then pipe it to Google Analytics or your ad vendor, Facebook, directly in real time. So they can get that conversion event in real time. ITP 3 may be right around the corner. I don't know. So keep in mind that any solutions you build today are temporary, such as a local storage one. I expect browsers will continue to copy each other. Firefox will copy what others. As far as actually limiting what you can do in a browser, so previous privacy efforts, and I think this is what Google's doing, is they're adding features to the browser as opposed to removing features. This is new territory where Apple's actually removing features. Again, I have some blogs I've written with my opinions out there. I'm going to write more as updates come. You can read those. Some of these are just kind of a summary of some links on the topic, so you can get the kind of 5-paragraph summary of 5 different articles on this topic, and you can stay current in your efforts to stay on top of this. Again, this is my topic on ITP. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening, and now I think it's time for questions.
It is. Thank you, Ty. I appreciate the time and going through from the basics all the way out to some advanced fundamentals on ITP. So we do have some questions. We've got about 20 minutes to answer them. Those questions that we cannot get to, please be assured we will reach out to you post-webinar and get those questions answered. But I think a couple interesting ones that came through, very simply, and I think you've addressed this within, but maybe you can expand upon it a little bit. Will ITP 2 affect the way marketing automation platforms use cookies?
Automated platforms with respect to, I don't know, I'm not sure that I understand that question.
Okay. Let's move on into another question. And for that person who asked that question, if you recognize that question, if you could give us a bit more of an example of which marketing automation platforms you are looking to discuss specifically, I'll look for that to come back through the queue. So a question, let's say if I return to my weather site frequently, will each new session reset my cookie expiration timing? For example, I check the weather at multiple locations and don't want to re-enter them after a static ITP expiry. So will that kind of web behavior be affected by ITP?
With each new session reset my cookie? Yes, it should. So every time you reset, that's a good question. So every time you reset your cookie or you visit a site, the browser should be, or the analytics vendor should be creating that cookie again, which effectively gives you another 7 days. There's a weird scenario where you come to a website and maybe search for weather on Google and you click on an ad, you go to that weather site, type in your zip codes, and because you clicked on an ad, it's only going to last for 1 day. But let's say you bookmarked that website, and so you bookmark and come back the second day and you create your zip postcodes again, then it'll last 7 days because the second time you came to that site, you did not click on an ad. So you came from bookmark, so that means it's going to last longer than the 1 day limitation. But again, yeah, every time you come to a site, all these cookies should be resetting themselves, basically expanding you to 7 days. So this impacts return visitor rates for people who have someone who comes every 10 days or 15 days or twice a month, where they're going to look like a whole new person each time they come to your site because the cookie is disappeared from 7 days.
Cool. So back on the marketing automation platforms question, we do have some specifiers. So like Salesforce, Adobe Audience Manager, things like that deliver personalized on-site experiences.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if this was kind of like an email question. If Adobe Audience Manager sets a third-party cookie, if they're not CNAME, which I don't think they are by default, then that cookie might be rejected. So they need a client-side cookie to last longer to keep track of who you are, which is probably there. Some of these vendors have services or they have creative workarounds where they're keeping ID and client side as well as server side, maybe putting in local storage temporarily. So I expect these vendors have creative solutions as well. What I recommend is, Telium creates an ID, and you could use that ID across your vendors. And so you only have to put one vendor in local storage, ID that one vendor's ID. Maybe it's your own. Maybe you generate an ID from your web server on your own, and try to use that ID across these platforms. So Telium has mapping toolboxes, so you can map. Google Analytics, you can map the client ID. Maybe map that to Telium's ID that you had put in local storage, and so you can have a consistent identifier that just gets done via mapping. If you do have Telium and you're sending data to these marketing automation vendors server side, then you're fine, because the browser doesn't know the third-party endpoint. So you just have to have a decent ID that consists, and you can send that data server side, and that should be fine. That's a great workaround there. So the primary objective to these vendors is find a way to persist your unique visitor ID. CNAMing is the best way in creating a server-side cookie, and Telium can use that when they fire connectors as well. That server-side cookie is also set from Telium. So CNAME your Telium endpoint, or do local storage workarounds right now and use a consistent identifier when you're talking. Lastly on that, if someone is authenticating with an email address, a lot of these vendors work well with an email address. So if you have like I mentioned earlier, if you get people authenticating, maybe you hash that or encrypt that email address so it's anonymized server-side, but that's going to be a consistent thing you can send to these vendors and have a consistent way of knowing who's doing what.
All right. A couple more questions within the time that we have remaining. So ITP, there was a question that came in. How does ITP affect Google tracking mechanisms on Safari browsers like UTM tracking? Does that qualify as link decoration? What types of considerations should people be taking there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, that will categorize as a decoration. So, Safari isn't smart enough to know if there's an ID or if it's just a campaign ID. It doesn't know if it's a unique identifier for me or just some kind of marketing information that allows you to group these clicks. So that will restrict your cookie just having the UTM parameters on that URL. It will restrict it to 1 day, assuming they came from an ad click as well.
So Ty, next question. You mentioned Safari, you mentioned Firefox, you mentioned Google Chrome, obviously, and there's been some mentions in the question about Opera as well. Do you see in the future ITP becoming standardized across all of these browsers, or is each one going to take their own unique approach to privacy on the web?
My personal opinion is ITP is really just Apple's fancy branding term to get visibility around this. Google has some plans already. I don't know if they have an official term for it like Apple does with ITP. I think that people are going to do the SameSite thing I mentioned. All the browsers are going to do that. I think Firefox already does. There's a bug in Safari right now around SameSite where they need to fix that before it'll work as Google wants, and Google's pushing Safari to fix that because Google Chrome actually running on a mobile phone uses Safari's WebKit underneath the hood. So Google actually needs Apple to fix a bug in Safari on the phone before they can leverage this SameSite default to lax, which they're going to do in February of next year. So it's funny to watch them talk to each other online. But I think the SameSite is the thing that's going to take off, where the web server just says, here's what this cookie is going to be used for. It's going to be used for tracking. I'm letting you know. And the browser can control that individually. I don't think other browsers are going to be crazy like what Safari is doing with these JavaScript restrictions. I don't think that's going to be copied. I really think that's just a marketing ploy by Apple just to get more attention. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think any other vendors are going to need to copy that. Again, if Apple does become more the dominant browser because of this privacy push, and they start becoming the majority browser, and then other vendors feel like, well, the only way I can get my market share back is to copy them, and then personal 2 cents.
Okay. So Ty, last question that we'll take, and then as we mentioned, we will look through all of these questions and get back to you. So But what about so-called second-party cookies? For example, we use an AA tracking server domain that differs from the actual domain name of the website. So is there any implication for second-party cookies, or is there any thing that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I remember Adobe Analytics, they call that their friendly third party. And the primary reason they did that was to avoid so many people blocking Omniture's default data collection server. So by giving it a friendly name, which is different than Omniture's default and doesn't match your website, you have a friendly third-party cookie, which was less likely to be blocked. But according to what I understand these things to categorize, that would be actually considered a third-party cookie. So cookies would not be able to be read from that because it doesn't match. So the only way, and you mentioned second party in the question, but when I think of second party cookies, it's really websites. So in reality, this CNAMED endpoint that doesn't actually match exactly your root domain is really a third party cookie. It's going to be blocked.
So actually, let's take two more, Ty. If you've got some questions, I got two good ones that I'd like to finish off with. Any limitations to server-side cookies as a result of ITP? I think this is something you touched on as well, but maybe elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, I touched on that with WebTrack. So WebTrack has to make updates. They have to say secure and HTTP only. And what an HTTP only cookie is the server sets it, but JavaScript can access it. So it kind of locks down this cookie to be more secure. And the secure part of that means only cookies will only be sent over HTTPS. So all servers need to be updated to follow these patterns, and that makes them appear to Safari as if they're sort of keeping you logged in. They're first party, they're secure, it's only server-side cookies. So those are the main restrictions, or what people have to do to work. I don't know if there's going to be any future way that, if these servers are all whitelisted or blacklisted and start getting blocked, that's hard. You will see some of these CNAMED servers showing up in blocking lists. So even if it's a first party, you'll see them, people identify them as trackers, they put them on some list, some popular website out there, and they'll make it on these lists. But still, not a lot of people use these lists. Not a lot of people go into Firefox and actually enable the strict blocking. So generally, a first-party CNAMED cookie should be fine. That should be something that's going to last for a while.
So anything else on that particular question? Okay, great. So last question, and I think it's a good one. Do you have a list of blogs that you would recommend for someone for watching for ITP updates? I'm going to make another plug to the Telium blog, because you are keeping up today, and as you mentioned, you've got a list of blogs that have links that you've used to build out this presentation. We'll continue to update those, but are there any additional ones that you'd recommend?
Apple does what I do, and they have a link that links to all their blogs on the topic, and they're trying to do well with providing screenshots and architecture diagrams where data goes here and then gets redirected there. They're trying to explain it well. There's others that'll summarize it, and they're showing up in a Google search. So for ITP, you'll get some good search and searching in Google. Simo, who I mentioned, he's got some clever workarounds. Sometimes I think they're a little too complicated. They're probably more for the Google Analytics only kind of smaller shops. So my recommendation is watch out for those ones that get too much in the weeds and are only creating complexity. But still, his comments are good, and if people ask him questions, he'll reply. And I like it, when he agrees with my perspective, of course. But you can look at his stuff. Simo Ahava is good. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think there's one I saw from a clearcode.cc. They seem to be some kind of consulting agency. But they had a great summary of just one pager on the topic. They'll show up in Google search results as well.
All right. There are a handful more that we aren't going to have time to get to today, and some of those specifically relate to implementation, so those are probably best answered over email as well. But rest assured, we'll reach out to you, and we'll look through those questions after the webinar today. Thank you for joining, and have a good rest of your morning.
Thank you.